Welcome to Foodytime. I'm Jay Fettigan, and in this episode, we talk with my great friend, Jonathon Alsop. Jonathan's the founder of the Boston Wine School. He's an author, he's a tour guide, and so much more. In this episode, we talk about his recent trip to Uruguay, where he tasted some wonderful wine and ate some great food. Sounds like he had a terrific time. Enjoy. So, John, tell me a little bit about your recent trip. I imagine it was a wine and food and travel trip to Uruguay. And boy, I'd love to hear all about it.
Yeah, um, it was very, very amazing. Um, you know how when you go to like writers' workshops, they always say, write what you know.
Yeah.
I think that's terrible advice. Um, because one, what do you know? Let's be
Right.
honest. So I just, for me, visiting this place that I had never visited before.
Hmm.
I'd only tasted the wines of Uruguay maybe once or twice in my whole career. So the whole thing was nothing but discovery for me, which I really loved. I do still smell like wine, and my liver is making funny noises. But that'll probably settle down bit by bit.
And had you been to Uruguay before?
I had not. I've been to Chile a couple of times, Argentina a couple of times. Uruguay is right on the Atlantic coast,
Mm-hmm.
between Argentina to the south and Brazil to the north. Buenos Aires is right across the bay from Montevideo.
Hmm.
Montevideo is the capital of Uruguay. Um, so it's right there. It's right sandwiched right in between Brazil and Argentina. Super interesting. Super interesting etymology. The name Uruguay,
Hmm.
literally in a native language, literally means the river of painted birds.
The River of Painted Birds?
The river of painted birds. There are 400 different unique species of tropical birds who live in this bay, this estuary, and then the river that runs inland,
Hmm.
and that's where Uruguay gets its name. Super stable and peaceful politics,
Hmm.
extremely progressive, um, divorce, gay marriage, legal cannabis,
Hmm.
hard wall between church and state um, for years.
Well, we
Uh,
could learn some lessons in the United States from them.
yeah, I really felt at home
Hmm.
there in a lot of ways. Highest per capita income
Hmm.
and highest standard of living of all of the nations of South America.
Mm. Oh.
Also, the largest consumer of meat per capita on the entire planet. I know this is crazy to even imagine, but the Uruguayan citizens consume per person on average 200 pounds of meat per year. We're talking
Wow.
we're talking like almost 4 pounds a week.
Sounds like my 17-year-old twins. So that's
I was there for an entire week. So I had like 7 lunches and 7 dinners,
Mhm.
and one of those I had fish, and the rest of the time was just this cascade of beef, spectacular beef, all grass fed,
Mm.
beef, lamb, pork. Um, Chicken is generally considered to be a vegetable, so that would be served with the vegetable with the vegetable courses. Of course, for breakfast, I was trying to keep myself together by just, you know, I was having distilled water and a plate of mashed yeast uh, for breakfast to try and stabilize myself a little bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you could walk us through the trip, what it was like when you got there, what the travel was like.
Yes, yes. So it's because it is, deep, deep, deep into South America.
Hmm.
From Boston at least, it's 13 hours, 14 hours of flying in
Hmm.
total.
Yeah.
Now, when you get there, um, I'm used to 13, 14 hours flying to China,
Hmm.
but when you get to China, it's like yesterday.
Right.
But when you get to Uruguay, in terms of at least from the East Coast, it's only a 1 hour
Hmm.
time difference. So even though it's a lot of travel and a little bit on the grueling side,
Hmm.
once I got there, I found, my ability to adapt to the time just very, very easy because, as I say, we were more or less in the same time zone.
Right.
This was a really good tour. It was organized by the Uruguay Wine Institute,
Hmm.
and a lot of these press trips and they call them fam trips, not because you're family, but like familiarization trips. A lot of them can be super grueling.
Yeah.
Like a different hotel every night, up and out of the hotel at 8 a.m., visiting two wineries before lunch, three
Hmm.
wineries after lunch. It can be absolutely exhausting. This
Hmm.
was the opposite of that.
Hmm.
We essentially visited two vineyards and two wineries each day, one in the morning, and then would often, have lunch there with the winemakers and with the people from the winery,
Hmm.
and then one in the afternoon. Um, so, uh, so Uruguay's signature grape, like how Argentina has Malbec,
Hmm.
Chile has Carmenere,
Hmm.
California has Zinfandel.
Hmm.
Uruguay's signature wine grape is this grape called Tanat.
Hmm.
And this is a grape that no one should have ever really heard of necessarily before.
Hmm.
It used to be very widely planted in Europe,
Hmm.
and now the acreage now it's either gone extinct or become unpopular over the centuries
Yeah.
in Europe. So there's just a little bit of it left in France. There's one little neighborhood in France that still grows and makes Tanat.
Hmm.
There's a bunch of it in Eastern Europe, I think in Hungary,
Hmm.
but otherwise that's it for this European grape in Europe. In the 1800s, the grape was brought to Uruguay, where it's kind of the classic immigrant success story. Like in Europe, everyone knows Tanat is like I don't even know if it's a second class citizen.
Uh-huh.
In the world of grapes, it's often thought of as just a blending grape.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this is why people leave their hometowns. Everyone knows you, everyone knows your limitations. They have very fixed ideas about who you are and what you can accomplish.
Right.
And so, like I said, this is kind of this immigrant success story that in this new land with new people, new soil, new ideas, Tanat has emerged to be Uruguay's signature grape. I should say um, signature red grape.
Right, because I know that was one of the things you said surprised you is the white wines.
Yes, yes, and the only wines that I had ever tasted from Uruguay were Tanat.
Hmm.
But then when we got there, my mind was absolutely blown by, well, first of all, the quality of the white wine. Their signature white grape is a grape called Albarino.
Hmm.
And we're starting to see this in the US market over the last 10 or so years. This is a Spanish grape from way northwestern Spain.
And a popular Spanish wine.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, they've really it's a grape that the Spanish have been growing for centuries or millennia,
Hmm.
but they've really done a good job of enunciating and identifying this. this is how we understand wine, right? By the grape type,
Right.
right? Like I'm a Pinot person,
Hmm.
right? She's a Chardonnay person, that kind of thing. So
Right.
they've really done a good job enunciating and explaining Albarino to people, so that now there is some. I don't know how widespread the consciousness of Albarino is, like across the American wine world,
Hmm.
but it has. It's got a really good foothold.
Hmm.
And so in Spain, it's grown in way northwestern Spain, the coldest, wettest, windiest part of Spain.
Hmm.
Right? It's right on the Atlantic. So now here in Uruguay, now we're in the southern hemisphere. So very different soil conditions, very different weather conditions. Um, the Earth is millions of miles closer to the sun
Hmm. Hmm.
during the southern hemisphere growing
Hmm.
season.
Right.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why when you think about Malbec, when you think about Aussie Shiraz, why that's so inky, right?
Hmm.
Inky black. Um, so it's growing under very different conditions. And so now we have an Albarino that instead of being the Spanish variety, which has good texture and has good weight, it's kind of a medium weight white wine,
Hmm.
but the Spanish version is can be extremely zippy, extremely acidic, very very bright.
Some
Now here
people would call that tart or
tart,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So if you don't like it, you'd call it sour.
Right.
Um, but that's sort of the personality of the Spanish variety. So
Hmm.
now here in South America, a lot more sun, a lot more heat. Um, you get a much riper, much rounder. Um, like people would put Albarino between Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay,
Hmm.
and the Spanish variety is leaning towards Sauvignon Blanc.
Right.
But this Uruguayan expression is leaning more towards Chardonnay.
Hmm.
So more body, more ripeness, more richness. Absolutely awesome. Way under $20 a bottle.
Yeah. And still tastes like Albarino.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it is absolutely it's genetically identical. So it is Albarino,
Hmm.
but it's just got again, it's just a richer, rounder expression of that, which in some ways isn't attainable in Europe. Europe is Boston and Rome are on the same latitude.
Hmm.
Where Albarino is grown is 300-400 miles north
Right.
of here. So it's the cold climate Albarino versus this hot climate Albarino, and it was not what I expected at all. I just expected like this barrage of tooth blackening, uh, tooth blackening red wine, and there was plenty of that
Hmm.
too. But the Albarino just absolutely just blew my mind. Great value, great
Hmm.
wine. Don't tell anybody. Right.
Well, because it can be hard for people going into a wine shop and finding wine from a region that they're unfamiliar with, or a country, or a state, and uh, and then they look at the price and it's $30 or $40 for a bottle of wine, and it can be a hard sell. But I know this. I just recently got some that you recommended. I think it was $16.99 a bottle for this Albarino, and it was fabulous.
Right. Buy 6 bottles and you can take a couple of bucks off that.
Right.
Right, with the discount. I mean, we're talking $3 or $4 a glass.
Yeah.
When
And
you when, when you
something
think about
different.
it.
It's the thing I loved about it is that it was very accessible, and at the same time, it was different. It wasn't like anything else I'd tasted before.
And this is another thing, on kind of a larger issue. Um, uh, the ground beneath our feet in the wine world
Hmm.
is really shifting.
Hmm.
as fossil era wine lovers like myself are like, like one physical away from being told to cut back.
Right.
Young people are still discovering wine and are still in a different way than maybe our generation and our parents' generation
Hmm.
enjoyed wine. But young people are still discovering it and enjoying it, but they're not interested in the classics.
Yeah.
They're not interested in they're not real they're not really interested in Bordeaux. They're not really interested in Napa cabs.
Hmm.
They're looking for something they've never heard of
Hmm.
from a place they've never heard of.
Hmm.
And while some wine lovers might say, well, yeah, the reason you've never heard of it is because it's probably crap.
Right.
Um, right? Young
Yeah.
wine lovers look at that and say, hey, this is something that has not been debased, demeaned, and degraded by
Hmm.
being like ground through the capitalism machine.
Right.
This is probably something that's still pure and still interesting.
Mm.
And Albarino's got that. Here's Albarino, here's Tanat,
Hmm.
another grape that people have never heard of. Another red wine that I discovered there. This is a winery called Garzon,
Hmm.
which is perhaps the largest producer in all of Uruguay. Um,
Hmm.
this is a grape called Marcellan.
Mm.
Marcellan, and I tasted Marcellan. Again, in Europe, Marcellan's a blending grape,
Hmm.
right? It's 5%, 10% of the blend. It's kind of inconsequential in people's consciousness.
Hmm.
And I'd had Marcellan in blends a few times that I was aware of, but in Europe, everyone knows you can't make 100% Marcellan, right? That's been established historically. Well, these
Hmm.
Uruguayans, they were not let in on that. Um, and
Hmm.
so now we've got, now here's yet another new red grape to discover,
Hmm.
Marcellan. And
And
it's a southern French grape, so
right.
it's kind of a warm climate grape,
Hmm.
but you know, uh, sometimes in the wine world we talk about balance,
Hmm.
which let's be honest, could mean anything.
Right.
But in terms of this wine, it's got a great balance between earth and fruit.
Mm.
So it's
Hmm.
fruity, it's got good base, it's got good treble, right? So it's nice and balanced. It's not all like a fruit bomb. It's not all like, you know, it's not all like a wine that tastes like gardening smells. It's got just the right amount of both of those things.
Mm.
And again, undiscovered, unknown. No one's asking for Marcelin in restaurants.
Right.
So it's, $14, $15 a
Mm.
bottle, where you can find it. So
And that's the same label of uh, the wine, the white wines.
right, Garzone is the largest single producer of wine in Uruguay,
Hmm.
and we visited the winery, and it's just like if you were gonna paint a painting of a winery,
Hmm.
this would be Garzone. The,
Yeah.
the views from every landing, from every patio overlooking the vineyards.
Hmm.
It's just it's just like what you could do if you could what you would do if you were to invent a vineyard and winery from scratch.
So if you asked AI to paint a picture of a winery, this would be it.
It would look a lot. It would look a lot like that. It's just
Right.
absolutely picturesque. Just a huge, huge, welcoming, open visitor center.
Hmm.
It's the winery's built very creatively and very practically, in that it's all on different levels. So there's no pumping wine from one tank to another. It's a complete gravity feed it's possible to have a complete gravity feed facility there. Um,
And I know this is somewhat esoteric, but what are the advantages of gravity feed versus being pumped?
there is a whole class of like low velocity food pumps for pumping milk, for pumping syrup, for
Mm-hmm.
pumping juice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you're pumping water, when you're pumping jet fuel or something, you just want to move it as fast as humanly possible.
Right.
But if you do that to wine, if you do that to food, um, you know, you can bruise it
Mm-hmm.
and damage it and change it.
Mm-hmm.
The jacuzzi whirlpool, jacuzzi
Right.
hot tubs.
Yes.
The jacuzzi family is a winemaking family in Carneros in California.
Uh-huh.
And their first, before even they got into the wine business, their first business was low velocity food pumps and
Huh.
juice pumps.
Mm-hmm.
And then they were in the wine business. And then that's how they ended up from like their pump business. That's how they ended up in the whirlpool hot tub
Huh.
business. So this is the jacuzzi family of the jacuzzi.
and and I suspect that it's more eco-friendly as well to have gravity feed because there's less power involved. There's less.
Absolutely. You're not using any energy. You're just gravity is doing all of the work,
Mm-hmm.
right? Moving the juice from this step of the production process, you know, down 8 feet,
Mm-hmm.
right, to the next step in the production process, and then down another few feet,
Mm-hmm.
right, as it's going from tank to tank and ultimately into the bottling line.
Wow.
Um, and what were the people like in Uruguay? I guess Spanish is the language that they speak, and what was it like being there as an American visiting?
Well, Spanish is the official language.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Brazil, just north of Uruguay, the official language is Portuguese.
Right.
So a lot of people speak both Spanish and Portuguese naturally.
Mm.
But the hospitality was fantastic. The food was fantastic. Again, a ton of meat, asado, barbecue, um, every imaginable kind of rib. Name an animal that has a rib. We ate it. And again, you think about Tanat being this really, Tanat gets its name from tannin,
Mm-hmm.
right? The thing that gives red wine that grippy red wine thing that red wine has that white wine doesn't.
Right.
This is where Tanat gets its name. So
Mm-hmm.
so it is in some ways it's the perfect food wine match with this meat oriented national cuisine.
Are there special signature meals or foods or dishes besides barbecue? What was there anything that you had that really stood out?
Well, something that I had that I had never had before is something called dulce de leche,
Mm-hmm.
which is essentially a caramel sauce
Mm-hmm.
that has as many regional variations within South America as there are regions.
Mm-hmm.
And there's fantastic competition between the Uruguayan style of
Mm-hmm.
dulce de leche, the Brazilian style, and the Argentina style. I did a chocolate class with a woman who's a chocolate maker originally from Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
And she was telling me one time that she flew to Argentina and had some dulce de leche in her luggage. They seized it. And there's this great apocryphal story that the Brazilian national soccer team was playing some sort of championship match in Montevideo.
Mm-hmm.
And as they drove down from Brazil, as they crossed the border, they had, their special Brazilian dulce de leche with them. and the Uruguayan customs seized all of it at the border. And then the Brazilians lost. And then when they said, "Why did you lose?" They said, "Well, why do you think we lost? We're eating that crappy Uruguayan dulce de leche. It threw us completely off our threw us completely threw us completely off our game." But it's a very rich. I mean, the closest way I can describe it is it's like a caramel sauce, like the most delicious, delicious caramel sauce you ever ate in your life.
Hmm.
And you know, you put that over pastry, you put that over ice cream.
Hmm.
You get kind of a large gauge straw and just drink it out of the jar. Not that I'm doing that. Um, um, but that was something that I had never had. That is something that I'd never had before, and that's a source of great national pride.
Hmm.
And everybody's got their own recipe,
Hmm.
how they like it, how they like to do it, and yeah. So we had dulce de leche like 100 different ways.
And of course, it's spring here this time of year, but it was fall there. What is the climate like? What's the weather like down there?
Well, like from a Boston perspective,
Hmm.
we would have described it as summer.
Hmm.
It was, it was the harvest. It was about the end of the harvest when we were there, which is the end of March. So this would be sort of the equivalent of like October,
Hmm.
maybe, at least in terms of the harvest schedule.
Yeah.
And it's very wet.
Hmm.
It can be very humid. There's a lot of rain there. It's a very kind of depending on the season, can be kind of rainy and wet.
Hmm.
But the weather when we were there, we had just great luck. The weather was just perfect.
Hmm.
High 60s, low 70s.
Nice.
60 at night.
Hmm.
That kind of thing. Another thing that I did, which I'm still kind of I'm not sure even at the time how I was able to how to understand and how to process it.
Hmm.
But Uruguay, some of the soils and some of the stones in the Uruguayan geology are the oldest exposed stones on the planet.
Hmm.
Some of the rocky hillsides that we were hiking over and some of the vineyards that we were in
Hmm.
were soils that were 3 billion years old.
Wow.
Walking across those rocks, which were the same rocks that were probably almost everywhere,
Hmm.
3 billion years old, and this is the last of them that are still not degraded and are still above ground.
Mm.
And that was sort of I felt extremely small.
Yeah.
Well, when you consider, I mean, in New England here, we're so influenced by the Ice Age, which, although was a long time ago, certainly in its infancy in comparison to that.
100,000 years ago,
Right.
right? Compared with 3 billion years,
Yeah,
that's like
wow.
that's like yesterday, um, in comparison. So that was quite an interesting experience.
Oh, and you said, and the culture you said was very open and very progressive, and um,
You know,
Very open, very progressive, very friendly. But Montevideo, beautiful city,
mhm,
um,
mhm,
beautiful oceanfront city. About half the population lives in the greater Montevideo area.
mhm,
So, you drive 15 minutes that way and it's just, pampas and wilderness, and
mm.
it's like Arizona, right?
Wow.
It goes
Uh-huh.
it goes from being very urban and very modern, to being ancient just in a very very few miles.
Mhm.
Very gentle. The highest elevation in the entire country is maybe 1,500 feet,
Okay.
right? Like 500 meters. So it's really very rolling hillsides.
Mhm.
Um, the Andes are on the other side of South America. This is
Right.
the this is the softened up Atlantic coast, Atlantic coast side.
So will you be planning a wine tour to Uruguay sometime in the near future?
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to Rioja in Spain this October,
Mm-hmm.
with our special guest Callie Crossley from GBH and NPR.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking with the folks at the Uruguay Wine Institute about a trip, about a year from now.
Mm.
So harvest 2025.
Wow.
It was just such a great place. So many great people,
Mm-hmm.
so much to learn,
Yeah.
and so many new wine experiences that I think it's just perfect for the wine school
Mm.
grads and wine school.
And when we talked, you had some uh, rather humorous comparisons between the group that you were traveling with on this trip versus some other. I don't know if you want to share any of those stories.
Well, uh, chemistry on these trips can be very tricky. About 11 years ago, I went on a press trip to Greece,
Mm-hmm.
which was the most debased, debauched, intoxicated thing. Not on my part. I was
Right.
I was more or less keeping myself together.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the people that we were with, it was a really large group of people. There was a lot of tension and a lot of weirdness and a lot of insane intoxication on that trip.
Mm-hmm.
That was probably the worst wine tour experience that I'd ever had. And coincidentally enough, a guy who runs a wine school in New York City
Mm-hmm.
was on that Greek tour,
Mm-hmm. Huh.
and he was on the tour to Uruguay. And the
Mm-hmm.
first day we're sitting there looking at each other, and I'm like, Scott, I think I know you. He's like, yeah, I think I know you too. Were you in Greece? And then we were like PTSD, like survivors. They were like bonding. We were like bonding over having survived that bizarre experience. But the chemistry was good here, and at one of the wineries, I don't know what we were doing. We were just talking to each other and laughing and joking and just being ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the winemakers says, "You guys have great chemistry." He said, "I think you guys have alchemy." He said, which I thought was a really great way to capture it. Someone who was on the trip from San Francisco. Her name's Gretchen Buck.
Mm-hmm.
She's a som there at Nopa, which is just a fantastic San Francisco restaurant. She's not just the som; she's the beverage director,
Mm-hmm.
the wine director there. So my daughter and my son-in-law had worked with her in San Francisco for years,
Yeah.
and she was even at Eve's wedding.
Uh-huh.
And when I finally got the itinerary and I was looking at the names, I was thinking to myself, I feel like I know this woman.
Hmm.
And as it turns out, I actually did. We had met at Eve's wedding, and so it turned out to be absolutely great. I'm gonna reveal some of my own prejudice that when I got the itinerary maybe 5 days before I left, and the list of all the people who were gonna be on the trip,
Mm-hmm.
and on the trip were four um, master psalms,
Mm-hmm.
right? People who have the MS designation, and
Right.
the court of master psalms has been through so much strife, caught up in so many instances of sexual manipulation and harassment. The reputation just could not at this point be much worse.
Mm-hmm.
And I could not tell you, those four master psalms could not have been any cooler,
Nice.
and it just was a great experience. They had fantastic, deep technical, understanding of wine.
Yeah, and what you have to go through to be a master som no small feat.
Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely. And these are people who've been in the industry for decades.
Mm-hmm.
So their technical knowledge of wine was just so incredibly deep,
Mm-hmm.
and here I am, you know, a guy who teaches people how to taste, think, and talk about wine, right? A completely different animal.
Right.
And another person who was on the trip was she's just like I think she's about 33, 34,
Mm-hmm.
and she's the wine buyer for Buyrite, which is
Mm-hmm.
this giant chain of warehouse wine shops in New Jersey. So
Right.
so here are these four master somms in this potentially very rarefied, deeply technically knowledgeable world of wine.
Mm-hmm.
Here I am, a guy just teaching people about wine and wine tasting, you know, um, and here's someone from the warehouse
Right.
liquor, like not Total Wine, but like Total Wine Wegmans scale.
Right. Big box wine.
Well, yes, and then someone who's selling wine and serving wine at the table side,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like right on the ground,
Yeah.
like right on the ground, and then another woman who buys and sells Yellowtail,
Right.
just that entry level ilk of wine,
Mm-hmm.
it was just could in some ways the group could not have been any different, but the chemistry was just fantastic. It was the second best wine trip I ever took, after the one you and I did to the Côte de Rhône.
Yeah, that was an
So
unbelievable trip.
that
That
was
was
unbelievable trip, and so yeah, second to almost tied for first.
Wow, that sounds great. Um, so, is there anything that we haven't covered? Anything else you want to talk about with this
Well, the only other
topics?
thing I'd say in terms of what I learned and what I discovered when I
hmm
was there, was vermouth.
Oh,
And and although people have preached the virtues and the charms of vermouth to me in the past,
hmm
I'll be honest, I'm like most people, I think of vermouth as an ingredient in a Manhattan.
right,
I
right.
think of vermouth as like, part of a dry martini.
A mixer.
Yeah, exactly. A mixer and like a secondary sort of ingredient.
hmm
And boy, was I utterly, utterly wrong. One of the places we visited is a vermouth vineyard and winery called uh, Vermouth Flores,
Mm.
and vermouth is wine,
hmm
but it's wine that's been steeped in different flowers, different herbs,
hmm
to give it a really elaborate. The wine that it's made from is typically quite simple wine,
hmm
because it's the canvas for the herbal infusion
Right.
of the wine.
hmm
But this is just, Flores, of course, means flower.
Right.
And this is the dominant flavor profile of this particular vermouth. A
Mm.
lot of different flowers, orange blossom, hops, different herbs that it's infused with. And then it's typically fortified with a little bit of, brandy,
Mm.
distilled spirit. It has a
Mm.
little higher alcohol level than just a straight ahead wine. But Vermouth Flores, they make a white vermouth, they make a rosé vermouth,
Mm.
a red vermouth, and just because there's so many different flavor compounds and flavor components in there, it's just so interesting.
Mm.
There's just so many things going on at the same time. And I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it on the rocks
hmm
with
Mm.
like a little lemon twist in there.
Mm.
I know the wine spritzer is people people going to turn their nose up at the wine spritzer all day long.
Right.
But I'm telling you, the stuff is, again, the flavor is very strong, very vivid, and a little bit of that with either, I mean, you can make a vermouth and tonic, right? Hit it with a little tonic water and lime, or even just hit it with some sparkling water, some club soda, and when you hit it with a little club soda and kind of turn the volume down a little bit, the flavors kind of get more expansive, right? So they're not, it's quite strong and it's kind of coming at you, and you hit it with a little bit of club soda, and there's just a little bit more space in there.
Yeah. Well, the
to
effervescence
taste
can
all.
certainly bring out a lot of different flavors and
Right.
lighten things up.
Right.
It does that for a lot of different
Oh yeah.
different drinks.
Yeah, it adds a little bit of acidity. CO2 is essentially acidic.
Right.
So it adds a little, that's the bite that you get, right, from
Mhm.
sparkling water or any kind of soda or something like that, is that little acidic bite to CO2.
Sounds like it'd be great for a hot summer afternoon.
Exactly. Exactly. And again, a couple of ounces of this 15% alcohol
Mhm.
with 4 ounces of sparkling water. Somebody help me do the math. you know you're you're
Right.
you're down to a very manageable, not super intoxicating
Mhm.
thing. So
Mm.
I went from having 0 bottles of vermouth in my refrigerator. I have
Yeah.
four. I have four in there right now. So I'm totally into it, and getting into some Spanish vermouth too, and sweet white vermouth and
Mhm.
dry white vermouth. There's a whole range. It's no wonder people's heads spin when they think about it. There's just so many different options and different forms. So that was another way that my wine life got changed a little bit.
That's great.
Well, I suspect every trip there's so much more to learn than you ever expect going into it.
You think, well, I mean, I act like I know everything. You know, but you think you've tasted it all, you think you've seen it all,
Mhm.
you whatever. It's best you hear it from me. You haven't. There's, there's always more to see, always more to learn, always more to know, and that's what made this trip great.
Well, John, this has been terrific. Thanks. I'm eager to try and taste a bunch of different wines and now vermouth from Uruguay, and maybe even plan a visit or a trip there sometime in the near future.
I'm gonna put you on the waiting list.
Please
How's
do.
how's that?
Well, thanks a lot. This has been great.
Anytime.
Well, it sounds like John had a great time in Uruguay, tasted some wonderful wines, ate a lot of meat, it sounds like. Well, I don't know about you, but as soon as I can, I'm going to book a ticket down there and check it out. This is Jay Fettigan, and I'll see you next time on Foodie Time.